to Data Guys Big Corporate Show, where we talk about enterprise data challenges and market trends. Sometimes it gets a little nerdy, maybe a little sarcastic, but always directly applicable and useful to our corporate data listeners, and that's corporate data and analytics people just like us. My name is John Wills, and I have over 30 years of experience in the data space as a practitioner, an architect, a practice leader, and an executive with different software and services organizations. And the other half of the two data guys is...
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Johnson. Very much like John, actually, this marks my 30th year in technology. And I've had a very similar career path that John has, coming up, starting as a software developer, working through data engineering, and then ultimately making my way into management and data program leadership. So glad to be here, and welcome to all our listeners, too. Glad you're here. I think we got a really interesting topic today. And that topic is the business value of data.
Yeah, sorry for stepping all over you, Chris. You know, I'm so excited to get to our traditional opening, right? I'm excited about the topic as well, by the way, but I'm also excited about getting to our traditional opening, which is
No worries.
where we start. You know, I ask you, and then you ask me what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're drinking, right? So, what are you reading these days?
Yeah, I found some really, I like to read up on a lot of the emerging technologies too.
Mm-hmm.
What I found in my latest read is from the folks over at Stanford University. There's a number of people that have contributed to its paper and a perspective, but they had a really interesting point of view on using OWL, the web language for ontology, for ontological graphs. And I just find it fascinating. They're doing some really cool stuff. You can link that paper. And by the way, for everybody, everything else that we reference here on the Two Data Guys Big Corporate Show, we're going to link all that up at the end of the show. So we'll share all that out with you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, what you drinking, Chris?
Yeah, today I'm drinking a really strange concoction. I've decided that... the gas station has the best whiskey. So I mixed a little bit of Old Number 7 with some Tennessee honey. And
Okay.
we're sipping a dram of
All
Jack
right.
Daniel's finest today.
Excellent. Love it. And what you watching these days?
Great question. I just finished a Netflix documentary on Quincy Jones. Probably, I think, one of the most prolific music producers of the last 50 years. So it was a fascinating story. If you get a chance on, it's called Quincy, out on Netflix. What about you? Back at you. What you reading?
I'm reading a book right now by a mathematician, Josh Ellenberg, and it's called Shape. And he really gets into how geometry applies to our everyday lives. I know it sounds like it's kind of maybe a stretch, but it's actually pretty fascinating book on mathematics. I never quite thought I'd be there reading kind of a deeper book on mathematics, but I saw him on C-SPAN on, I think it was, Afterwards, or one of those book interview shows. Thought it was fascinating. So here I am, really enjoying it.
Yeah, math books. Gee, remind me to tell you how I flunked geometry twice.
Well,
What are you drinking?
what am I drinking? Well, I have a clear liquid. That's a hint, but it's not water. It's Mark and Digger's Sugarland Shine. It's called Mark and Digger's. It is their apple rye. So the apple rye, so it's rye based, so it's clear, but then they put in this tart apple. So really good Sugarland Shine. That they don't sponsor us or anything. I just happen to live in the Southeast, so you kind of got to go there. I think it's part of the state law or something like that. So
Yeah, sounds delicious. Um, Gives me a good reason to get on down south. What are you watching?
well, I was been pretty hooked on the Perry Mason episodes that come on late at night, and kind of going through episode 1 through 5. And my wife's got me hooked on the I think they call it a prequel. It's called 1883. I guess it's a prequel to some other show I've never seen, which is, I think it's called Yellowstone or Yellow. It's like a out west cowboy show or something. But anyway, 1883 is a fascinating journey of a set of immigrants across the U.S. trying to make their way to Oregon. So yeah, pretty interesting.
Great period in our history, right?
Yeah,
Really fascinating stuff. Fantastic.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess you know what that sound means. That sound means it's time to introduce our topic of the day, which I know we both are super excited about. And it's called the business value of data, right? And business value of data. So I think that term or that phrase gets thrown around an awful lot. But when you sit back and you think about it, what does that mean? What are all these, these cliched statements that data is the new oil, it's the new bacon, it's a corporate asset? What does all that really mean? And what sort of emphasis does that put on data when you say, the business value of data and that it equates to all these things? So we're going to explore that a little bit. Um, is it really a corporate asset? What does it mean to be a corporate asset? And if so, how can it be measured? And so I'm excited to explore that and to get into it. Why don't I let you kick it off first? And like we do in all of these episodes, we're going to break it into three chunks, sort of three blocks, as we call them. And I'm going to start with the first question. So my question for you, Mr. Chris,
Yeah.
is data a true corporate asset? And if you think it is, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I can't imagine anybody who's worked in the data field who hasn't had this conversation at one point or another, right? And if you haven't, you
Mm-hmm.
certainly will, or you should. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a great topic for today. Um, if you consider, really practically, there's no business that can function without it. So the answer has to be, absolutely yes. Um, Having said that, I think it can be a challenge to associate, what value is, and ultimately how do you figure out what those data assets are, and then try to quantify them.
Mm-hmm.
Often they're best qualified by direct association to business capabilities. So you think about marketing and manufacturing and sales, and right, this is where those
Mm-hmm.
assets really shine because they help us to understand, the performance of those capabilities or the gaps in performance, whatever. Um, so ultimately, I think a good example would be like a chief marketing officer may assign a value to his or her customer 360. So when
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to track the results of a marketing campaign, for example. So I think there's no question about it. It's really valuable. But again, as we kind of tease this out, what does that look like and how do you quantify it? I think business users are pretty good at helping to define the
Mm-hmm.
value of their data. Um, they do that in a day-to-day operational manner, right? As their
Right.
workflows and everything that they do. Alternately, sometimes value comes in the form of risk reduction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And go find a team that's really struggling with bad data, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
tell you that converse story, right? That our data is not valuable, it's horrible, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to fix that. So I think there's a number of probably less tangible ways, but I think we're going to want to tease down to how do you get more tangible.
Yeah.
So in my mind, that implied value of data, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a no-brainer, like I said. But in
Yeah.
the case of sales, for example, data specifically tied to the actual business metric,
Mm-hmm.
such as quantity sold and
Mm-hmm.
supporting margin, that is
Mm-hmm.
much more tangible and much more easy to assess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those are some great points. And I also think about associating data as an asset, right, to tangible business outcomes. But on this question of is it a corporate asset, I kind of took a different take on that, right? Years ago I was involved in a discipline which is kind of the combination of finance and IT, which was called IT financial management, ITFM. Some of you can look it up and see there's a great association and group out there that just practices ITFM, IT financial management. And I looked some of their cost accounting principles and in some of the publications that they put out. I also went in search of what is the, well, what are the true accountants, the CPAs of the world say about data as an asset, right? Because I started thinking about other corporate assets. People are probably the most important corporate asset, and then we have all kinds of things, buildings and machinery and equipment, and then you've got raw materials and everything, and they end up on the financial statements.
Yeah, that's a great
So
point, right? Kind of that whole general ledger perspective.
yeah, so and for me it was a pursuit to see how mature was data from another very mature discipline's perspective, right? So kind of went and searched for that. I searched a couple of fairly recent CPA journals and guides, and just to summarize that, what I found is that the CPA community basically says that, I mean, all your points are 100% valid, that data is super important, it's an asset, but what the way they're accounting for it is uh, a little less mature, and that's not on them. It's they treat data as an intangible asset, not a tangible asset. So you're not going to find, the ability to depreciate it. You're not going to find, so it's really not going to directly show up on the financial statements. It was kind of interesting, right? Because I think ultimately, if data was a true corporate asset at that same level, it would make its appearance there. Now, interestingly, when they talk about it as an intangible asset, they also compare it in a lot of cases to things like I mentioned, raw material, right? And that you have data in the form of raw material then actually get converted. A lot of us would call that the transformational process of data that we're familiar with. But as it's transformed, and it becomes information, and then they assign more value, right, to that data that's been transformed into information. So it's just interesting. Again, it doesn't change how they account for it. It's still an intangible asset that doesn't directly show up on the books. But last point on this, the whole accounting profession with all of the GAAP, standards that they have to follow, um, very mature practice, as I said before. And what they're saying is that in order for data to be treated as a corporate asset, it should have procedures around it that treat it like other corporate assets. And so what does that mean in terms of the data world? It kind of brings us back to that topic of governance, right? And I'm not going to go into that just other than to
Yeah, that's
say,
another podcast, my friend.
right, other professions are citing the need to perform governance, to treat it, if it's going to be this fully mature and realized and recognized corporate asset.
Yeah, those are great points, and I think at some point, and again, maybe this is another discussion, but when I think about some of that GAP, or there's this paper out years ago called SOP 98, and that was from the General Accounting Office as well, around this. It's really based on this notion of what is capital expense and what's operating expense. And for so many years, those types of GAP, accounting guidelines and rules have really put boundaries on how we really quantify things. But the interesting thing is that they were made up at a time when none of us thought about data being an asset, and none of us even understood,
Right.
25, 35, 40 years ago, this notion of how you can't run a business without it, that never crossed anybody's mind. So I think there's some real opportunity for a lot of that to shift and change to get modernized as well.
Yeah.
Great,
And
great stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm not trying to throw any stones at the world of accounting or CPAs. I fully recognize data is a very, I guess, if it is a corporate asset, I don't know if fungible is the right word, but it kind of feels like the right word right now. It's
It's a fun word for sure.
yeah. But what I mean by that is we as data people know how hard it is to pin down. You can have data in a database, data in a file. Somebody can pull it into a spreadsheet, munge all that stuff together. There's a technical word for you, munge, and then come up with a whole derivative of the data, right? Of these two original data sets, now there's a derivative. So how would we expect an accountant to account for that, right? that's a big ask. That's a big challenge. So
That's right.
again, not throwing stones.
Yeah, I don't
It's
even
just,
know
yeah,
if they
yeah,
know it's a problem, right? I
right,
think it. No, I mean
right,
it. You know, I didn't mean
yeah,
it derogatory either. But
yeah.
um, yeah, well, uh, all wonderful points. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you know what that sound means? It sound means that we have to move to our regular post block one break, which is, you know what it is, but
The
the audience may not. It's our
Farmer's
update.
Almanac
Yes,
feature.
update from
Yes.
the Farmer's Almanac, right? Keeping it a little light, keeping it a little fun. So what I see on page 102 of the Farmer's Almanac this month, we've just turned the month into March, is I see that we are going to have 11 full moon dates, lunar full moon dates. And so now if I take that knowledge and I move back and I look at what are some pretty uh, good things to do on full moon dates in March, right? Just a sampling. We're not going to. So the Farmer's Almanac tells us that, wow, well, on February 28th, so, I guess we missed it by a day. It would have been a really great date to get a hair perm, right? But we missed that one. So in March, let's see, on the 2nd and 3rd, good date to put in your plant your above ground crops. So looking forward to that.
I don't think those farmers are in my zone or my region.
Well, I don't know. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll get
We
to
may
that in a
need
minute.
dynamite to get to the earth. It's a little cold.
Let's see, pruning encourage growth on the 4th and 5th. So that's coming up. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, go figure. On the 1st of March, castrating animals. Very good date to castrate your animals. So I guess, poor animals. But
I wonder if that's
anyway.
on my work calendar. You know how all those regular items show up. I don't recall seeing that one.
All right. Now see, planting by moon phase. Let's see, what do we have in March? So in zone 1 where I live, you can go ahead and on the 7th, you can get your cucumbers in. Radishes are good on the 7th. We've got spring wheat. Good time to get spring wheat in early March. Now let me check area number 3, zone 3 in the country. I'm sorry to say, Chris, you're still the frozen tundra for a while yet. Not a whole lot to put in the ground in.
It's still ice fishing
early March
here. That's right. Absolutely.
All right.
We're still boring holes in the lake and pulling our food out that way.
Good stuff. Good stuff. That's our update from the Farmer's Almanac.
Well, fantastic.
So, Chris, now that we've wrapped that up, why don't you help us out? So, Chris, after wrapping that up, why don't you help us out and lead us into our second block on this topic of the business value of data?
Yeah, sure thing. If data is highly valued as a data asset, I would assume that there's a high proportion of the total IT spend on it, right? So when I think about, the annual budget cycles, and we all go through them, right? What is the allocation that the budget of either IT or a CDO or even the CFO have made for data projects, specifically for either transformational data projects, digital transformation, et cetera. So let's talk about the spend on data and data related projects within the context of that total IT spend. So what amount gets allocated?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because if we say what is the business value of data, and is it a corporate asset, like we talked about in the first block, then you would say, well, organizations going to put the money where their mouth is, and they're going to put investment into programs and projects that focus on data. So, I'd done some research in the past on budget allocations and how they kind of trickle down. CIO is essentially a big portfolio manager, right? And they have this huge bucket of funds usually but major portions of that go into technical debt, sustaining environments, right, that are up and running and so forth.
Yeah, it's kind of
Uh,
that keep the lights on mentality,
yeah,
right?
I mean, from your experience, not to put you on spot, but from your experience, I mean, what percentage would you say roughly of a budget get to go to net new innovative work and projects?
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty staple answer for most CIOs. That it's usually maybe 5 to 7
Mm,
percent of the
right,
complete spend annually. It's
right.
atrocious, and God bless them, right? They're doing everything they can, but the demand for sustainability, for
Hmm.
operational excellence, for the IT spend, for infrastructure and deployment and new projects, and it's just really overwhelming. And don't forget the resources, right? So people cost
Yeah.
money
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. People's a major cost. So
I think that's
that
what I've heard. I don't know if you've heard differently,
no,
but
that
that's
tracks
five to
very
seven
that
percent.
no, that tracks very close to what I recall from that research I did a long time ago. So my point was coming back to data is, data is going to always have a minority of that spend. Um, we just have to recognize that. But then I kind of went on a search over the past few days, and I said, okay, what are people spending now, right? Where are they putting their investment? And so I found an article in CIO magazine, and it was based on some research by Accenture, very recent research by Accenture, and they sort of named the hot and cold investments that were being made by CIOs at the moment.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm just going to scroll through this real quickly, and I'll just read some of them off, and then I'll
Yeah,
wrap it
very
up with a
cool.
point. So they call out a hot investment at the moment is no big surprise, cloud native managed services, right? Cloud, this whole generational shift, right, to the cloud that we're in the middle of. Another hot one is increased use of IoT sensors and analytics. Interesting, analytics kind of slipped in there. We're going to hear that as a theme in just a second. Cold is legacy data warehousing, data lakes, appliances, and private cloud. So again, kind of
No
interesting.
surprise there
Probably
either.
another podcast, right?
Yeah.
Why would legacy warehouses, lakes, and appliances be
Data
cold?
lakes in the cold bucket. Yeah. I mean, who saw that coming
Yeah.
18 months ago?
Well, come on. You're talking about ice fishing. So there we go. Cold data lake. I'm sorry, bad humor. Another cold one was on premise data centers. Then now we get to some hot ones. So employee engagement platforms, that was pretty interesting, especially coming off the pandemic, right? Kind of
Yeah.
makes sense. The
Yeah.
Zooms of the world and all that stuff. Another hot one they name is data and analytics. And so now we're kind of back in the target zone. And now they have another hot one, machine learning and data science. Again, right in my opinion, back in the target zone of data, right? Because it's
Curious
data and
about
yeah.
curious
Go
about
ahead.
that last one, John. Is there there's been a lot of cross lane
Mm,
traffic between ML and AI, so machine
oh
learning
yeah,
and artificial intelligence. Does the AI play anywhere in hot?
it does. I mean, they're sort of well, on that last one, machine learning and data science, they're sort of lumping machine learning and AI together, which is kind of a little micro trend that I've been seeing. I don't know about in your world, but they almost always are referred to in the same breath. And I know that they're kind of cousins, but yeah, it's interesting. So I would say yes, but
Yeah,
it was
good.
cited in that very last one, and then the last one they call out is customer experience. So stepping back and kind of looking at all the hots and colds there and thinking about it, uh, what I see is the investment, this very minimal amount of investment, whether you cited 5 or 7%, a large portion of it is going into data, right? So I would say, is there business? What's the business value of data, right? Is it a true corporate asset? Well, I'd say if putting your money where your mouth is any proof, then absolutely, we see that in a very tangible way. So what would your comments be on this question?
Yeah, I think I'm very closely aligned with even their take on what's hot, what's not,
Hmm.
and it floats regularly. This is it's constantly changing and evolving depending on, like you said, there's so many organic outside impacts on how we think about data, but the one thing that remains really constant is that the break rate growth is just continuing at a pace to
Hmm.
double almost like every 6 to 12 months. I think much too often the focus is on the functionality and usability of applications and tools.
Mm,
So when I think of that spend, we know that all of that money is really going into what? It's an app portfolio, right?
mhm,
Sitting on a bunch of compute and storage.
mhm,
But all of the compute and storage, all of the infrastructure, and the infrastructure guys will kill me for this. They hate this, but it all lives only to service the business's ability to use applications to create data, edit data, report on things, right? And just
mhm,
consume it. And I think that's the tide is shifting on that. But we still have, I think, a fundamental problem when it comes to this because people think in terms of apps, right? I mean, think about
mhm,
even the younger generation coming up, right? It's all about the phone and what's on the phone. And and I've talked with a lot of business executives and leaders too, who, when they think about a customer 360, for example, they think in terms of either a company that delivers customer 360, or they think of a product that will allow them to get to 360.
mhm,
Ultimately, I think the CMOs and their subordinates and the directors, they think in terms of no, it's really about the customer and the different dimensions of the customer. But I think it really is the problem is that it's a focus around applications and ultimately, I think that the app portfolio really does need to be examined as as how important it is to the data and the information that's coming out of
mm,
it. You think about a lot of legacy systems, even we think about the old ERPs, really, really powerful, right? Great investments. But at some point, the investment is so heavy versus the
mhm,
information that you're getting out of it. And because many of them do have all these legacy technologies that they pull forward, they're not gracefully extended and they don't
mhm,
interoperate in a hybrid cloud environment. They don't. So,
mhm,
for example, if you have an ERP and you want to go buy customer 360 data from a vendor, say like an Axiom or somebody else, and by the way,
mhm.
they're not a Two Data Guys sponsor, but if they're interested, again, check in after the show. My point is if you wanted to acquire a data asset,
Mhm,
right, like that, how do you interoperate the two of them? It can be a real challenge. So ultimately, when I think about the spend, what I would like to see is I'd like to see a shift to where, when that project portfolio request list
mhm,
comes up to the CFO, CDO, CIO, really they're having a meaningful discussion around what's it doing for our data landscape? What
mhm,
are the investments that we're making? And then if we wanted to benchmark that, are we holding our executives
mm,
accountable for you remember when we used to talk ROI and TCO and all those kind of things?
mhm, mhm,
Um, you know, I think there's a very similar approach in data portfolio management that you would
mhm,
have for the application portfolio
mm,
management, and you would now start to be able to quantify. So if I'm the head of manufacturing or the head of marketing,
mhm,
I should have some requirements from folks to say, okay, if we give you this money to invest
mhm,
in your
mhm.
portfolios, what does that mean for our overall data? And
Yeah.
start forcing things like cross-functional usage.
Mhm,
And, you and I have had a lot of conversations, and again, I think this would be a really great topic for us for another day on ownership versus stewardship of
oh,
the data.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, but when I think about driving stewardship in at the enterprise level to become more of a practitioner of how do I share and collaborate the customer data across a program or
Mhm,
manufacturing or supply chain or wherever it's going to be, I think there's an opportunity relative to budget to start measuring the metrics of how that works.
mm,
So,
mm.
not many companies are able to really qualify that byte per dollar.
Right.
BDP. Sorry, a little dyslexic there. Did we just coin something new? I guess
Byte
we
per
can't coin
dollar. I
anything if we
like it.
can't
I like
pronounce it.
it.
But
Let's
this
do it
goes
anyway. What the heck?
right,
Yeah.
right on. I'm in. This goes back to our first block, though, that treating data as an asset really should have the same type of portfolio interest as any other corporate asset. And I would argue in many cases that the data assets are really far more valuable today. So we need to flip the script on that. In
Yeah.
the end, unfortunately, though, most data products tend to feel like IT stuff. And again, I spent a number of years, as you know, in IT and
Mhm.
those guys have a really tough role, and they're really working hard to keep the lights on, as we talk about.
Oh yeah.
But the challenge with the business is that they tend to really look at IT as a back office function. And where I'm coming from is that when the folks are trying to build the budget and they're trying to talk about what do the projects look like, they do tend to have a very IT tool feel, and it
Yeah.
becomes a tool discussion. It becomes a server discussion, a cloud this, a cloud that, and honestly, I think that turns a lot of business users off, and a
Yeah.
lot of business leaders off. And I know that we're really trying to shift the discussion these days between the CIO and the CDO, and ultimately the CEO as well, right? So
Well, just to respond to a couple of your points
yeah,
there
of
with,
course.
um, I'm really hopeful that we're kind of at a watershed moment where we're seeing a significant shift from the heavy focus. And I don't think anyone could debate that ERP system implementations and apps didn't take, over the past several decades, didn't take the lion's share of the budget, right? And I think that's pretty clear. And I think we're probably at a watershed moment. I mean, look at that list of the hot and colds that I read, right? There's significant investment. I think there's a sense that there's stability, right, in the operational process in the ERP systems of the world. Now, whether that's wholly true or not, right, it's a different topic. But the investment and the spend, the innovation, the growth is going to come out of the result of using data proactively, right, to drive the business. I ask a lot of leaders, and this get a little far afield, so I'll just make another point or two and wrap it up. But I ask a lot of leaders who I'm on the phone with every day. I sort of ask them, what end of the spectrum are you leading from? And I'm sort of paraphrasing without getting specifics, but I say, is it growth and business growth or is it risk mitigation and audit, right? Because in my daily life, I deal with a lot of people that need to allocate budget on one end of that spectrum or the other. Predominantly, it's on the growth side, right? They want to use data for what I'll call offensive, proactive purposes to grow the business.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that we're seeing the shift in the allocation, putting your money where your mouth is, and we're seeing the importance of that. And so you made an interesting point when we talked the other day, and I mentioned shadow IT, and you said you think it's out of the shadows, and I know you're kind of joking a little bit, but
Well,
I
not
think
too
there's
much. I
well,
don't think there is much shadow going on. I mean, they're
yeah, but it's also an indicator, I think, of the importance and the formality of bringing data and analytics in more into the mainstream. So, yeah. Anyway, probably
yeah,
should wrap up the second block. And
absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I think we could go on and on for sure, but
Oh, absolutely.
so you know what that sound is? It is time for the word of the day. So fire up your email app, because the first person to send us in their definition of the word of the day via email is going to have untold recognition and honors bestowed upon them. Wait a minute. No, that's right. It's the Today to Guys podcast. You're going to get none of that. What you will get is at the end of every show, except for our very first episode, we want to share the brilliance that is our audience. So we're going to give you your own screenshot for correctly identifying it. So in other words, a whole lot of nothing, but you'll have our appreciation, and we'll give you credit on the air. So the word of the day is bag of words.
Hey, that's 3 words, but okay, it's
What?
hyphenated, so it's
Uh-oh.
hyphenated. So it's that's okay. It's hyphenated word, but it's 3 words. But anyway, bag of words.
That's a
All right.
stupid.
All
No, we
right.
shouldn't use it. Let's not use bag of words.
No,
Let's
no,
come
no.
up with
Bag of
something
words.
cooler.
No. And I'm not giving any hints of where
Oh,
it came from
man.
either. All right. Good luck, everyone. We appreciate it. Well, Chris, you know what? We've looked at in the first and second segment now, we've looked at, is data a true corporate asset? What are people spending on it? How are they spending on it? So now we turn perhaps to my favorite, segment where, I call kind of the so what. All right. So what, right? What does it all mean? What does it all mean to the business value of data? What are the implications? Right? It's kind of wide open. But why don't you take a swing at it?
No, I think it's right on target, because ultimately when you get into these conversations and when you get into the what I would call the power rooms, right, with the C
Mm-hmm.
levels, that's exactly what they're going to ask. So what's your point? What are you trying to get at? And here's what I would say: we know data is extremely valuable, right? Yet we also know it's underappreciated as an investment. We've talked
Mm-hmm.
about that.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I think more business leaders really need to insist that data projects are top of mind when it comes to planning. So what? Let's put our money where our mouth is, and let's show or quantify the number of data projects that we've actually called out.
Mm-hmm.
CFOs need to be more proactive role in driving accountability down to department heads. So in other words, listen, Miss CMO, tell me how this spend is going to impact better data across the organization. Right? Great example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another potential collaboration between, and I mentioned this several times, CDO, CIO, et cetera, and then ultimately the CFO, in terms is both budget and stewardship. So what does that mean? Let's make sure that we've got real metrics, real measurable OKRs against data budgeting and cross-functional enterprise stewardship.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Go ahead.
good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. Did you want to make one more point? I just want to respond to a couple of those,
Yeah,
which
no,
I
go
think are,
respond. I've got a couple of
yeah.
things I wanted to fill in, but
Okay. Okay.
I'd love to get your
Um,
feedback.
well, what triggered, your example, the CMO sort of triggered in my mind, um, the fact that, the so what for me is that this doesn't, if there's value in a business value of data, then you have to prove it, right? And so, you just can't go around using these cliches, and everybody, I mean, we all kind of intrinsically know there's value, but you really do have to prove it. I mean, you kind of made that point in the earlier block too, when you talked about, um, allocation of spend and allocation towards a portfolio, but you really have to prove it. So what does that mean? We got to do hard work. You've got to go out, you've got to declare what the value is. You actually have to do a lot of listening and a lot of research with business stakeholders to get them to attach it to business outcomes. And that's much easier said than done, because the use of data is an indirect, causal relationship to business outcomes. So what do you do about that? Well, you've got to get leaders to attest to, meaning make assumptions and attest to those assumptions, that if certain things are done with data and data is used in a certain way, that it helps them achieve their goals, helps them achieve their business outcomes. And so, I just think that's part of the so what is we have to work really, really hard to associate data to those things and tell that story, because no one's going to tell it for us, tell it for us. And people aren't just going to believe it because we all say data is super important, and data is corporate asset, right?
I think you're spot on. I would especially, ground to that concept of it's hard work. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
always talk about, well, the business needs to own their data, and you need
Mm-hmm.
to take charge of that. And um, it, it, it seems to make so much sense in that, both you and I have been department heads and led organizations with budget, and in both those situations, you know, it, it was so important to really understand what it is that you're trying to measure, what your outcomes are,
Mm-hmm.
how you're trying to attest to that. And oftentimes I think, executives feel themselves flying a little blind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to fix that, you have to roll up your sleeves. You have to really, really understand your business, and you have to really understand how you're going to measure it, how you're
Mm-hmm.
going to guide it, how you're going to transform it. And data is going to drive all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you that I think there's a shift where we're seeing more and more data analysts move out into the business, right? So they're kind of embedded. We see almost every department in a large Fortune 500 hiring in their own data analysts. So in other words,
Hmm.
a job that was typically in IT, hey, I need a report, I need you to do some analytics for me. We're actually even seeing entire analytics teams spun up underneath some of
Hmm.
these different C-level structures. And I think that's very indicative of this notion that the transformation is starting to happen, that people are
Hmm.
making those investments. That must continue. And just as a quick aside, I had a conversation with a brand new CDO, never been in the role before. This is about a month ago. And I mentioned this notion of business having to own it, and he almost had this visceral reaction to that. He's like,
Hmm.
"There's no way I'm going to get to them to own that." And he says, they just don't want to do it. And he says, so what do you have to tell me about that? And I says, well, I think you should go get a bat. And I think you should write, you own the data, and you should start going
Yeah.
in and clubbing the favorite items that they have from their house and, their little trinkets with that and say, and I'm not going to stop until you own it. No, that's,
Chris
of
is
course,
not really a violent man, so
we're going to cut that part out of the podcast. It's not right. But the point is you have to have a very
yeah,
strong position to say, what does own it mean? And this is one of the gaps, right?
yeah,
So for some of this is going to be
right.
education, it's coaching, it's training, but it's also the tooling and the process for data management that makes it easy for executives. I mean, think about it. Even those grizzled vets out there that have been doing data management and data technology for years,
Hmm.
the break rate I talked about of the data influx and the massive escalation of data flow, it's hardest for people who are deep professionals who've been doing this for
Hmm.
30 years. How do you think a newly minted CDO or a CMO
Right.
or a COO is going to manage this? We need to provide mechanisms to help them with that. Anyways, um, you
Well,
know,
I'm going to
good, good
make a
stuff.
prediction. I'm going to make a prediction. My prediction is that the conversation that you had with that CDO, I don't know how bold I want to be with my prediction, but
Well, I just talked about
I
hitting things with a bat. So I mean,
right, right. All right. Let's say within 5 years, let's say about 5 years. I don't think they're going. CDOs are kind of the luxury of having that conversation. Look, I think there's a mega trend. I think the mega trend is that data literacy. People are becoming more data literate. There's just a natural wave of that. If it's for no other reason, by the natural shift of through the workforce, right? People retire, younger people come in, right? If for no other reason, there's a mega trend. They come in far more data literate. So
no question.
I think and this may be
And
another
I love that,
topic
by
for
the way.
another.
What an
Yeah,
outstanding trend, right?
yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe this is another podcast topic. But if you project out into the future far enough, you see where the most of the population, the employee population, the majority will completely assume that they are responsible and, in fact, will desire to work with data. And how big a shift is that from 10, 20, 30 years ago, where it was completely the opposite and IT should take care of that for me. So I don't think IT should see that as a threat. I think they should see it as an opportunity. And so
I agree.
yeah,
It's not like the work for IT is going to go away. It's always going to be there.
right,
Um,
right.
and just to wrap the CDO tail up, um, I was we were actually on a sales call with some data products, and I was helping a team. And in the end, when we left,
Hmm.
the CRO of the software company asked me. He says, what do you think about his point of view? And I said, honestly, between me and you, I think his management team's going to eat him alive,
Mm,
because I think at
hmm.
some point, if you don't understand what you're walking into and the amount of transformation and that ownership and that hard work that you have to
Hmm.
drive that you talked about, I am so there with you. If you don't get that and you're not prepared to drive, I mean, ultimately, I think the role of a CDO or of any of these executives in what we're talking about, when we think about establishing the value of business
Hmm.
data, is really to be a change agent. And we've
Absolutely.
all these things we've talked about are it's a collision of different paradigms,
Hmm.
right? And we all know that if we're ever to survive this onslaught of all the new data coming in and all the transformation and change,
Hmm.
I mean, think about the pandemic and how it turned everything over. Who planned that? I mean, just talking about a supply chain where
Hmm.
we assumed everything was always available, and now I just
Hmm.
talked to a little side note. I just talked to my local auto parts guy. I grew up with him here. I live in a small
Hmm.
town in the Midwest, and um, he told me that he can't count on any of his supply chain to
Hmm.
get him any parts. So he's got a list that he goes through with his team every day, and they call different
Hmm.
shops and different stores just to get and source these parts. Who could have seen that coming?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you don't have the level of fortitude
Hmm.
to be willing to drive the transformation, that's, I mean, that's really the role of the CDO in my mind. But
Hmm.
anyways, I digress. Ultimately, I think where our land is a lot of really cool stuff that we've landed on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, hit on a lot of great points there in this so what section, as I call it. So why don't we go ahead and transition to our ever so popular section, which I call Start Bench Cut. And you know
Beloved
how
by
we
millions.
and you know how we play this, Chris, right?
Yep.
Just like a baseball manager or a manager in any sport, you have to decide for three players I give you, right? We're going to orient this towards the data world, so don't get too worried. You have to decide: Are you going to start them? Or are you going to bench them? Or are you going to cut them? Okay. Think
Okay.
you got it?
Yeah, I
Think you
think
got
so.
it? All right. All right. All right. So the first three are conceptual modeling, logical modeling, or object modeling. Start, bench, and cut.
Oh man, I mean that's for me, I'm torn here because I know what I want to say, but I know I'm going to
I
say
know what you want to
they're
say.
two different things. I'm going to start object modeling. I'm going to bench logical modeling. Sorry about that,
Yeah.
and I am going to cut conceptual modeling.
Ooh, okay. All right. Okay.
Only
We agree on
because
we agree on
I just want one caveat, just before the
yeah,
hate mail
yeah,
comes in,
yeah, yeah.
is I have struggled so much to just understand the word conceptual and get people to really grok that. So,
Well, you know what I'm gonna do? Because I think you know the order I'm gonna go in, but
yep.
I think I'm gonna surprise you a little bit. I am going to start logical modeling because that's actually where I started my career. And so, when you learn something early in your career, it just kind of sticks with you. So
Yeah, of
it's always
course.
been a it's always been a go-to. So I'm going to start that. Now, surprisingly, perhaps I'm going to bench object modeling, right? So that's kind of come up on my priority list a little bit, right?
I think I'm
Um,
moving the bar a little bit with
a
you.
new appreciation, right?
Yeah.
But object modeling came to me much later, right? So it's probably like one of those things where you learn a language as a young child very easily, and then when you're older, not so much. It's probably one of those things. Anyway, but I got to cut conceptual modeling because it looks like 8 boxes on a sheet of paper with like 12 lines, and I don't really, you know, it's valuable for a couple conversations, and then you got to don't hate me, everyone, but then you got to do real work, right? You got to do real work. So, all right, enough of that. Second one, Ralph Kimball, Bill Inman, father of the modern data warehouse. Well, I don't know if you'd say modern, but yeah, I think so. Modern data warehouse. And Edgar Codd, father of the relational database management system.
Yeah. So again, this is great fodder for hate mail, and sorry about that, but listen, here's the good news: we all got opinions, right?
His name
I,
is Chris. It's Chris.
Speaking on behalf of John, I am going to start Bill Inman. I just,
Ah.
I really, in that whole
Hmm.
Kimball Inman
Hmm.
discussion, and
Hmm.
I know that, and you can give me some feedback on Ralph as well, because I know you guys have a relationship and you know each other. I met both of them, and I've looked at both of the approaches, and I've actually been fortunate enough to try to implement, and execute against both of those.
Hmm.
No question about Edgar, right? I mean, we've all benefited from that. But I'm going to start, Bill.
Okay.
I'm going to bench Edgar,
Okay.
simply because even that benching of the relational
No.
database sounds like the whole kind of next generation, and sadly, and you know, but
No. The
I'm gonna
rock
have
star
to
of data
I'm,
marts.
I'm gonna have to cut
Wow. Okay.
Ralph.
All right. All right.
And let me one caveat just so everybody understands.
Yeah.
Ralph is too smart for me. I couldn't wrap my head around a lot of that stuff. So, when I'm
He,
outwitted by somebody,
yeah, he's
my
being
my go
modest
to
now.
is, I don't
Yeah.
need to
All
do
right.
that.
I'm gonna completely the opposite. I'm starting Ralph Kimball. I love the bus architecture and the data mart approach. I think it aligns really well to business process and how you overlay, a business process on top of it. So I'm going to. Wow, this is a tough one. This is a tough one, right? But it forces you to prioritize. Oh, all right. I got a bench Edgar Cod.
Yeah,
I just
there you
all
go.
respect to the relational database management world, right? It's dominated. I got to cut. I got to cut Bill Inman.
Yeah.
So we're
So
almost completely the opposite there.
I think we're really a great example, the microcosm of those two philosophies, and
Mm,
the let's just say the intellectual battles that have occurred
mm,
in that space for so long, so long. So I
hmm.
think we're just really a great example of where most people lie with that too, and with Edgar, lying in the middle. We all know that that is just so fundamental
Hmm.
to businesses even today. So I think that works out really, really well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and maybe a little bit of a red herring there on Edgar Cod, but it spices things up a little bit. All right, the
Yep.
third one is not, I'd say it's a tangent from data, but let's just go with it. Python, Basic, or Shell script.
Oh, well, this is going to be super easy for anybody who knows me. I am a Pythonista, although these days I'm renewing my love for Java, simply for
Mm,
production runtime ability. I'm going to start Python. I am absolutely going to bench shell scripts. I love shell scripts, but again, as we start to move away from that, I would like to see the ability to escalate our data management and competency and capability off of the OS to the extent that we can.
hmm.
I
Hmm.
want to elevate that. I want to drive that into mere mortals. So this is the notion. And lastly, I am going to cut basic. In my editorial, I think you've heard this before, but for those who haven't, uh, why would you call a language basic? I mean, I don't understand that, but that's just a side note.
Yeah.
I think with all the advances in the ability to learn and understand how to code, and to use a language that's purpose built for data
Hmm.
management,
Hmm.
and with all the great libraries and extensions that are out there, I just don't think that basic can swim with these dogs anymore.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I
I was
think it
I was
was
a basic guy way back
great
when.
language for so many
Yeah.
years. Oh
Yeah.
my God, I was too. We've talked
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
We both have time coding in the technology, but
Yeah.
it is what it is, right?
Yep.
Time to
Yeah.
move on.
All right. It's kind of an easy one for me. And I think you and I are 100% aligned. I'm going Python, I'm going shell script, and unfortunately, I'm going basic. It's kind of gone the way of the dodo birds or whatever those things are that go extinct, right? So awesome. All right. That's start bench cut.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so enough fun for now. Let's get back to work, and we'll go back to our basic question. I think hopefully we've provided some good context around this value discussion. Does data have business value, and what is its value? So, John, where do you land? Let's
Yeah. I
close her
mean,
out.
hopefully, well, it's probably obvious at this point, but I mean, my answer is emphatically yes. It has value. There is business value of data. And I think everyone, non-data people included, non-technical people, I mean, everyone just sort of intuitively knows that. I've mentioned that several times. It is the secret sauce behind so many positive things happening, um, everything from customer sat, employee sat, understanding how people are feeling, to making key business decisions. You've mentioned supply chain several times. You mentioned in marketing and sales, and every different function area of a business and every process. It's so fundamentally important. So yes, I think emphatically yes. Um, what is its value in concrete terms? That doesn't magically fall out of the air. You can't pick it off the shelf. It has to be derived, defined, attested to, and most importantly, communicated, right? We have to be our own best communicators of the impact of doing data work. So,
That last piece, so critical, right? So critical.
yeah, but we're technologists, we're data people. And I mean, I hate to cast us all with the same brush, but, or, paint it all with the same brush. But I mean, we don't tend to be the strongest uh, advocates for ourselves and for the work we do, and to cite the value. So, but we have to
That's right.
really concentrate on doing that. So, I guess I would just, wrap up my comments on this section by saying, it's important that we then define the things we're going to measure and align those to what you've mentioned a couple of times, which are specific business outcomes, right? So you have to find key stakeholders who you align with, attached to their specific very specific business outcomes, and just for the very reasons I cited, which often we're not the best communicators. So let others help amplify the impact that your work is having on their work and their organization's objectives.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that. What do you think, Chris?
Oh, for sure. I think it's undeniable, especially given the increased importance and reliability that the modern business has on data and the role it plays in their landscape. It's becoming unfathomable, actually, how it can't be front and center, and probably, I've talked about my parity model, right, with the transformation from enterprise architecture. I'm going to link up a paper on that at the end here too. But it's this whole notion of, you think about the BATE model, business, application, information, and technology perspectives in the enterprise. And I think data and business are on parity. I really do. I just don't see how the two operate without each other anymore. But anyways, I believe its value needs to be reorganized. And I think we need to think about data's value as an outcome versus a cost. And I think that's another transformational thing. We talked about SOP and general accounting principles. I think when CEOs start putting data outcomes on their epics list and saying, this is what I want to transform. I want to transform my customer 360. I want to transform my identity 360 or my supply chain. I think the world's going to change. So it needs to be an input to an outcome, or even a measure of outcomes. Either way, I think if custom companies are going to be challenged to quantify that value, but again, sometimes all you got to do is say, make it so, right? Number one. And then ultimately, the sooner that a company starts mapping data to the business capabilities, that's and I think that's a whole nother discussion we can have, right, at some point, because we've both used that practice to really effectively, and we've had some great discussions around it. But really understanding what the direct map is for the business capability to the data that you're going to use, it's going to help everybody. It's going to help people understand how to plan, how to acquire better data, how to manage the quality of it, how to govern it. So understanding really deeply, and again, this goes back to that whole CDO discussion, right? People have to become the owners. I hate that word, but they have to become stewards of their data and drive and define what that looks like. So to me, it's one of those things that we're still not quite there in terms of how do we move it from intangible to tangible. But I think if anybody doesn't believe that data is valuable and has business value, we probably want them to replay the podcast.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yep. And I love that topic of capability model. And I do want to touch on that in future podcasts for sure, because I think that's super important. Well, excellent. input as always, Chris. I know I've learned a lot, and that kind of brings us to the end, unfortunately, sadly. But I want to really thank our audience, as I know you do as well, for listening, and remind everyone about our next podcast. We have another very interesting topic, and it's also a very challenging topic on standards and compliance regulation, right? That's literally an area that's exploding. And I think we both know that there's also a lot of older, sort of dusty regs and compliance that are out there as well. And so there's this huge challenge of how to deal with the wave of the new standards and regulatory requirements around compliance, sensitive data, privacy data, all that stuff. So I'm really looking forward to exploring that in our next episode.
Going to be a great discussion. People still haven't solved for X.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we really look forward to everyone joining us for that exciting episode. Until then, this is John.
Yeah, and I'm Chris. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Say goodbye for now.